All right, welcome back. Welcome in to another episode of Buzz Beat. This is Brian Geisinger. I will be joined by Darian for another episode, another draft episode. And once again, Richie Randall is here, just making sure the trains run on time, doing the one on the 1 and 2s here, producing, and we greatly appreciate his expertise for that, but I do think he will be unheard mostly in this episode. A lot of draft content the last couple of weeks. We've really started to ramp it up here, and we're in the not quite a month out, but getting close to being a month away from draft day or draft days 2024. Before we get into 4 prospects that we're going to go through on today's episode, Darian, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, doing great. It's good to continue doing some more draft content. The good thing about us, like not just doing one giant episode, is between episodes we're getting more and more information. Whether that's true, whether it's true or not, I don't know. But we're just getting more and more information about these prospects on a deeper level. I think everything you need to see on film is on film, but it's interesting to hear like some of these other news stories that are going around. So it just makes the process even more exciting.
Yeah, stuff's starting to really like kind of heat up a little bit here. It even feels like there's some moving and shaking atop the draft with one of the prospects actually that we're going to discuss on today's episode, perhaps making like a semi-late push for the number 1 pick in the draft. And a guy that actually is still technically his season in France is still going right now, that being Zaccharie Risacher. But before we get to him later in the episode, we're going to stay in the States, and we are going to go to the Southeastern Conference and look at Reed Sheppard from the University of Kentucky, the SEC Freshman of the Year in the coaches vote, and the only player in the country to amass 145 assists, 80 steals, and 75 three-pointers. It was a really impressive season for Sheppard, who sort of came in as a big-time freshman recruit, but maybe a little bit further down the pecking order from guys like Justin Edwards, who had a tough time with his stock this season, DJ Wagner, and even a guy like Rob Dillingham, who had an amazing freshman season, mostly coming off the bench with Sheppard. And Dillingham's a guy that's looking like a top 4 or 5 pick. Sheppard maybe in the same range, maybe like a notch lower in terms of overall tiers. Sub 19% assist rate, 24% assist rate, 4.5% steal rate, 52% 3-point shooting. And Sheppard is with those, especially with those shooting numbers, like the 3-point percentage and the steals rate. And that's at, over 8 3-point attempts per 100 possessions, which is a decent number, not a ton, but given the context, it's about right. But, it's obviously performing very well in a lot of draft models. And is a prospect that I actually do like quite a bit. At the combine, he measured a little under 6'2" without shoes, 182 pounds. I would say, going forward, probably projects as a combo guard, but I think there are some teams that are going to try to turn him into maybe we'll look to turn him into a primary guy and more of a pure point. We'll see how his on-ball game translates for that role, but just in the immediate gives you some serious shooting. Big time shooter and some tertiary playmaking. And then defensively, obviously he lacks, some stuff in terms of size, physicality. He's like basically my size. But so for which that's fine. But for an NBA player, it's a little tough. And there's some habits on that side of the floor that I think could deserve to be tightened up a little bit as well. But certainly showed his anticipation and feel with off the ball this season and in passing lanes and closing out and contesting. But what he lacks in size, you do see it sort of like showcased in terms of the lack of strength. He can struggle with contact at times. But overall, there's also some good athletic traits to like. 42-inch vertical leap, measured at the combine, And I think there's some functionality to it. Like if you watch him play, he's not necessarily an above the rim finisher, but you see that lift on his pull up jumpers when he is, settles into the mid range. He gets good lift off of a live dribble. I would define his like first step as quick-ish. Likes going to his left, but overall like a reactive and pretty like quick and decisive athlete. So there's some stuff to work with there, even with the I think like the lack of, obviously, elite NBA size for the at the guard position. So before we get into some of the other more granular stuff, Darian, thoughts just sort of generally on Sheppard and perhaps even, positional versatility and athletic size combination.
Yeah. So with Sheppard, I may have said this last time, but I'm saying it this time if I didn't. If Sheppard was 6'5", he would be the top pick in the draft, more than likely. I think it's really just a height thing. To all the reasons you mentioned, I think he outplays his size in a good way. He is smaller. Even his wingspan is only like 6'3". I will say there are some cases where that has worked out. You look at guys like Kyle Lowry, you look at guys like TJ McConnell. It's worked out for him. As I said, I mean, that's what, 2 names. So, it's not like it happens every draft, but it does happen. It can work with the right team. And even those guys, they had to kind of move around a little bit to find their spot. So are you looking to spend a high pick on that? I don't know. But as far as what he can do, I think he's a very talented guy. As you said, I think teams will look to use him as a primary ball handler at times. I really don't see maybe him being your starter. But it really does depend. You look at a team like the Spurs, where it kind of really don't matter who you put around Wemby, as long as you put around talent around him. So I think it's going to make up for it. I think he's an active defender. He plays defense. It's just his size is what limits him. So overall, as a prospect, I really like him. I really wish he was taller, just because I think he deserves his flowers. I think people see the height and think he can't play. And to me, it's the complete opposite. He's an extremely talented guy. He is just vertically challenged, unfortunately. But in the game of life, he'll be winning, as you said. 6 feet, 6'1", can't be mad at that. But basketball, unfortunately, doesn't really work out that way. But all the talent in the world, it's just unfortunate that I think that he's being discredited because of his height, which I get, but the talent's there on both sides of the ball.
His skill is very high. Like if you're using stuff like shooting touch as a measure of skill, to be that size and to be considered a top 10 guy or a lottery guy, even in a weaker draft, speaks to the skill level. And it's pretty legit. 55% on twos this season at Kentucky, 52% on threes, 83% from the line, 70% true shooting, which is obviously a very impressive number for a guard. Not all of that coming off just the catch and shoot, 51% on off dribble threes, according to Synergy Sports. And some of the just like per possession numbers were pretty nutty. Over 1.15 points per possession on spot ups, basically like the best number in the country. 1.075 points per pick and roll possession. He shot very well out of the pick and roll from a couple levels on the floor. 50% on pick and roll threes. And 60% on pick and roll twos, not a ton of attempts, and then 43% on dribble handoff threes. Those can sometimes kind of like be more movement based. Sometimes they're a little bit more sort of like pick and roll-y in terms of like how they're generated, but got a really nice shot. I mean, quick release, clean transfer, no wasted motion. And for a guy like him, he can't, like, it has to be airtight and efficient. He's got great range on it. And that is something that the shot in general, I think my sort of like theory on Sheppard is the shot really does help compensate for some of the like size disadvantages. Like he's such a talented shooter. It gives him a little bit of gravity. It almost allows him to play like a step faster. Guys have to close out to him. That gives him opportunities to attack. He gets to play off of his pull-up shot, right? When he's like trying to drive and get downhill, you see him use that lefty hang dribble all the time, right? That's like kind of a go-to move for him to try to get a step on guys. And he needs that because he has, smaller strides when he's on the drive. He's not like super elusive with his handle. So he needs to be decisive and quick and really play off the jumper. But those hard closeouts can turn into more than just, drives or one dribble pull-ups or whatever for him. He has good feel for the game, sees the floor, so you can combine those two things, and all of a sudden he's driving and kicking it back out to the next guy. He's helping you build and maintain advantages. Just in general, like good feel, good pace, good flow in the half court. Like is a real weapon to have because of the shot and because of the sort of like space passing. So any other thoughts on, how about you just go right into Sheppard's offense? What are some of your like general thoughts on him on that side of the floor?
I mean, you said a lot of what I was thinking. I also would just like to add just how almost just fluid he is as a player. I really looked at, cause I saw a lot of his games like live, obviously on television as Kentucky was all over the TV as per usual. You would watch the game and you would see him hit a couple of shots. But you really wouldn't think anything of it. But then he makes some play at the end, and you're like, let me go and see what he's done. And then you look, and he has like 15 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, a block somehow. It's like how this guy has just been impacting the game just all over the place. And I really like the way his offense, I think he can play with the players around him. I don't think that necessarily he has a style of offense. I think he's going to be a coach's guy, in my opinion. I think he's going to be a guy that coaches are going to love to have. It's just a matter of what the makeup of your team is around him. But I feel he can almost fit in any system. Of course, I think with his size, you maybe want him to be like the one and kind of stay there. But positionless basketball, if he gets switched onto anybody, I think you're okay with that. And if someone bigger guards him, I think you're okay with that because, like you said, he has his shot. He has his ability to just kind of put the ball on the floor. He's not afraid to go through traffic. Now, yes, contact is a little tough for him because he is smaller, but he definitely doesn't shy away from it. Of course, he's not taking hits like Castle, but he does. He's a lot smarter about it. Let's just say because Castle knows his size, his strength, and I think you can say that same thing about Sheppard. He knows his size, his strength, so he's not going to do anything that's kind of off the beaten path when it comes to trying to make a play for the team. So offensively, I think he can really just fit in any system. It's literally just a matter of who do you have around him, because I feel as though he's going to be one of those players where he's better with the better players you have around him. You can't have a bunch of mediocre players around him and then expect him to all of a sudden be this guy to kind of pull you out the dark. He's going to have some talent around him. He's going to have some versatility around him. But I think that's strictly because of his size. If he was taller, and I know I'm going to keep saying it, but if he was taller, he probably could do it himself. He wouldn't have to rely on these other guys offensively to do some of the things that maybe is just a little more difficult for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that he's a really talented offensive player.
Yeah, he's an amplifier to me. And to your point, like even if he was at his current size, but if he had like the Rob Dillingham ability to like separate, with that shot, then you'd really be, I mean, he's already a really great prospect, but I think he'd have, it'd be easier to sort of like put a higher end, a positive outcome, or positive outcomes for him. I like his ability when he is looking to drive. You'll see him when he's sizing up a guy, like he'll take a few steps back and then look to kind of like take that extra space, ramp up, and then try to get downhill. Again, he does like to go left. He has, decent use of angles, finishing around the hoop. He can kind of surprise you with his ability to finish around size and length at the rim. I wouldn't say it's like an amazing trait that he has, but he's not a terrible like rim finisher because of it. He's going to always be limited, certainly, just because of the size. And I don't want to like keep harping on that too much. It does make it a little bit difficult for him in terms of like accessing certain passing windows. I'm curious to know what you think of his passing. Like, I do think he can get ahead of himself at times. I was watching the Kentucky-Florida game from Rupp either this morning or last night, and twice in that game he left the floor sort of with, like while trying to drive baseline. Kentucky ran a little pistol action, flowed into empty corner pick and roll. He went baseline and then got caught in the air twice. And he's not 6'7" Tyrese Halliburton, who can just, sling skip passes all over the yard. I do think at times he does a nice job taking some chances, and like he'll throw a one-handed lefty skip pass. The overhead passes are good in the open floor. I think his passing and his feel is good there, but just like not an elite manipulator in terms of like the handle and pass combination. But there's still some stuff to like with him as a passer. Like I do think he's like a positive passer.
Yeah, for sure. I think any team's going to be happy to have him.
Exactly. And again, just kicking out the shooters, placing it to the dive man. I mean, maybe you don't see a ton of those sort of like lay down passes in the paint, but it's not that he can't do them. And it will just be interesting to see, like, if the team that drafts him tries to use Sheppard as like a primary or an engine of offense or a point guard. Who knows? Maybe he has that in his game, but right now I kind of like him more like as like in the tertiary role and, some pick and roll usage, but a lot of him, really playing off the catch, playing off of pin downs, playing off of dribble handoffs.
Yeah, for sure. With his passing, just to add a little bit, I feel like, and a lot of people like to say this as almost the way it's used, it makes it sound negative, but I think he's a smart passer. Almost to what I said earlier about his offense and driving to the rim. It's not, he knows what his limitations are and what he can do. And like you said, he does like to push himself a little bit as far as try to something a little extra here and there, but I don't think it's like ill warranted or it's like, oh, why would he do that at this point? It's usually a pretty, if he's going to do a pass, he has a reason for it. He sees an opening. Usually it's there. It just may not get there on time because of the length, because of the size of the defenders. But I very rarely watching this film felt as though that was just a terrible decision by him. I mean, outside of the basic 19-year-old decisions,
sure,
there was nothing I felt like he just doesn't know what he's doing. It's just maybe he got a little bit ahead of himself, as you mentioned, but I feel like he knows for the most part what he's doing and kind of how to execute that.
How do you feel about Sheppard on the defensive side of the floor?
On the defensive side of the floor, I mean, there are a list of guys in the NBA I do feel like he can defend at a pretty decent level. I mean, we'll be here all day if I had to sit here and name them all. But it's obviously going to be guys similar to his size, whether that's height, whether that's weight. It's going to be guys somewhere around there. I don't think he's going to let people just blow by him. I think that's one thing that I feel like is a misconception, is that because of his height, because of his size, he's just going to be a matador and just let everybody just go through. But I don't think that's the case. It just may not. He just may be able to guard those guys who are just extremely physical or bumping, against everybody like a pinball up to the rim. He may not fare well with those guys. And then also you may wonder what pick and roll defense is going to look like. But I think if you pair him with a good person, I think that may not be too much of a hassle, because he is, like I said, a guy that he's going to hound you. He's going to play defense. He's not shying away from it. He's not going to just sit there and be like, oh, well, I'm small, I'm not going to play. No, he plays defense. It's just literally the physicality of it. I have faith in his defense. If we're talking strictly Hornets, don't see it, but that's more so on our end than I would say for him. But I think there is a lane for him to be not only good at the NBA, but just extremely successful, have a long career, even with the defense.
Yeah, he's gonna. I mean, if you threw him into a playoff game right now, obviously he'd have a big target on his back, right? Just because he's probably going to be the smallest or second smallest guy on the court, and apex wing creators are going to target Jason Tatum, LeBron. Those guys will try to get him in a switch and bully him, and he's limited in terms of that. You can definitely knock him around, bump him physically. Again, from this Florida game, saw Zion Poland kind of get into him, bully him on a couple of drives. He's got like enough quickness to recover laterally when he gets stuck on screens, which does happen at times. I could see that being kind of an issue with a step up in terms of like size and athleticism going to the NBA. But there's something to be said about him laterally. And like you said, like he will battle against larger guys when he's switched onto them. He will try. The team defense, there's like good and bad to me. He is, I think, among top prospects. He's pretty bad at ball watching, probably among the worst. He gets beat for relocation threes, back cuts for layuffs, guys flow into dribble handoffs. He loses touch with them. He loses sight of them. And then when on those relocation threes, the closeouts aren't always timely, and he doesn't have the length to like make up for the lateness and really like bother and contest 3-point shooters. Like if he could just knock that stuff out quickly, I would feel pretty good about the team defense because he's a monster in passing lanes. Good feel, good anticipation. He jumps, kick out passes. He can dig. He can quickly turn those when he forces a turnover. He can quickly turn that into offense going the other direction, gets a lot of steals off those actions, and just like his hands are good, very fast, very quick hands, good instincts. So there's some stuff to like with him on that side of the court. You just got to get rid of some of those bad habits because like you can't be like a target to go out one-on-one and also like, and this is, you know, with the obvious caveat, unless you're like a star offensive player,
Right.
and then also be the guy that's losing guys, you know, for relocation threes. You just can't, like, it's too much. But overall, I think there's some good on that side of the floor. Last thing I would say about Sheppard before we move to our next guy, I am going to be very curious. I meant to mention this earlier in terms of like the on-ball pick and roll stuff. I'll just be very curious to see where it lands in the NBA and like what kind of pick and roll coverages he's able to attack. You know, can he afford, is he going to bring the center defender up closer to level if he's hitting shots? Is he going to force, you know, hard rear view contest? If teams go under screens on him, can he burn them with pull up threes? Like, I just think the pull up three for him is going to be a big deal. And if he can't really like hurt teams doing some of that stuff, it's going to sort of again push him more into that like tertiary role too. So, all right, enough on Sheppard. Let's flip the page here and allow you to introduce a guy that charted as the second tallest player at the combine. That's UConn two-time national champion Donovan Clingan.
Yeah, so Donovan Clingan, I mean, honestly, there's not really much to say about him because I feel like a lot of his love comes from him probably just being the most well-rounded big when it comes to this particular draft class. If we're talking strictly Charlotte Hornets, I believe the 2025 draft class for 4 centers would be better if they feel like they need to approach the center. You have like 3 or 4 centers that can all stretch the floor in a better extent than Donovan Clingan can. But like you said, second tallest player. Overall, I just don't see too much of a difference between him and Mark Williams. You could say what you want to say. I will say I feel like he eats up the paint a lot more than Mark Williams, and I really kind of want to look at film of Mark Williams and see maybe what that difference is. Part of me feels like maybe it's just the structure of the defense at UConn compared to obviously the Charlotte Hornets, who indirectly funnel everything to Mark Williams, and by that I just mean they don't play defense and then everybody's attacking Mark Williams in the paint. But for Clingan, I like his skill. I just don't think it's too different from what we have, and that's kind of my biggest caveat or my biggest issue with what we have now is Mark Williams, Nick Richards. They're very redundant, and then you add Donovan Clingan to that. I know that he shot well at the combine, but do I believe in that shot? I don't know. I made a tweet earlier today talking about how Charles Lee has adopted a lot of his coaching philosophies from Coach Bud. And Coach Bud had Al Horford shooting, and then one of his first signings when he became coach of Milwaukee was bringing in Brook Lopez, and by that time Brook Lopez was hitting threes. Both those guys were 30 at that point. I don't think that Clingan is just going to be that, but I think a lot of people are trying to force 7-footers to be that, and so to draft him in hopes that he can differentiate himself from our center room currently by him being able to shoot, that's not a good selection in my opinion. You don't pick him to say, oh, well, maybe he can shoot. It's just too much to Mark Williams, too similar to Nick Richards. You may could say he's better than either or, but either way, overall as a prospect, I just don't see why. Actually, a lot of publications have us as the best fit for him outside of maybe we don't. Maybe they know more about Mark Williams' injury than we do.
Yeah.
But I just don't see it overall. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, he's a great prospect, obviously. I don't think he makes a ton of sense for the Hornets, so I mirror your thoughts there. What I would add, like if you're stacking up Clingan versus Williams, I mean, obviously Clingan's a little younger now.
Mm-hmm.
He's slightly they're around the same height. Clingan was almost 7'2" at the combine. Only Edey was taller, 9'7" standing reach. So I actually think Williams was closer to like the 9'9" range. I mean, all of these guys are just massive. Really like the archetypal, drop coverage center, right? Like true drop centers, true drop fives. And then, screen setters, rim runners, offensive glass guys on the other side of the court. Like he also measured at 282 pounds at the combine. Enormous. And like, Basketball Reference has Mark Williams currently at 240. So, I mean, part of it is like one of the things with Williams, like he's always need to add, if not add weight, just like get stronger. Like at the lower bodies, you could always sort of like knock him off his spots on. I mean, as dominant as he was at Duke,
every time he goes against Jalen Duren, it's just night and day.
Yeah, and I mean, like the guys that used to bother him when he was at Duke, it would be like, Zed Key from Ohio State. It'd be these like, 6'7", 6'8", 260-pound guys that could just like stuff him under the basket and then like, put up hook shots. And again, Williams is an amazing college center. He's been a very good pro when healthy, when Steve Clifford's allowed him on the floor. But you can go back to the 2022 draft. It's something I talked about a lot. But back to Klingan, like obviously, like UConn used him in a few different ways, guarding pick and roll, but primarily drop. I mean, occasionally they'll bring him up to the level, have him blitz, switch late in the clock. And like with his size, he's like fluid enough to kind of be able to like tread water in those scenarios. But like this guy is here to play drop coverage, right? And to wall off the rim. And like, that's a really effective piece to have on an NBA roster. Like if you've been watching the NBA playoffs, like, and I know Rudy Gobert is like the apex version of this, but like his ability to close off the rim against Denver was huge. Like I know he struggled one-on-one guarding Jokic, but like he took away like Denver's pet play, right? With his ability to like deny the lob to Aaron Gordon. Just goes to show you like how important it is to have someone that can rove and protect the rim or play drop coverage and protect the rim too. Obviously it's going to be a different challenge for Gobert going up against, Luka Doncic in Dallas now, but such an incredible presence at the hoop, protecting the rim, just like pretty unbelievable. I'd stop short of unbelievable, but like very, very impressive, block numbers across 2 seasons at UConn, almost 13% block rate across 2 seasons at UConn, over, right around 11.5% this season. And the defensive rebounding numbers are monstrous too. I mean, 26% across 2 seasons, 23% this year, just under 30% his freshman year, kind of in a lesser role, behind Sonogo on 2, Connecticut title teams. The one other thought might be with him is like, I do not think of Klingan as like a high post facilitator. Like he can conduct a little bit from up there, and that's something UConn asked him to do at times. Play 5 out, play at the elbow. I wouldn't say it's like necessarily like a huge strength, but it looks like something he might be able to do. Maybe he's got a little bit more offensive, like high post ability than someone like Williams. Again, just if you're comparing the two of them, right? But I don't think that's like a huge strength of him. Some concerns with him on the offensive side of the floor. I don't think he gets downhill super quickly, like getting in and out of breaks when he's like screening and diving. Not the most fluid finisher in traffic, but the catch radius is obviously enormous. He's got great hands. He can catch passes on the dives. He has the ability to kind of like catch low passes, catch them in this midsection, get up and finish. And that combination of catch radius and like, the hands really helps him on the offensive glass. As well, I just think there's a chance like you could, if teams want to switch against him, he'll probably try to get on the glass or seal and post up. He scored out of the post some this year, but like he's maybe a little limited offensively. Again, there's some high post initiation stuff. There's some short roll passing. I'm not sure if there's strengths, but it does feel like you can at least like the offense can like at least like flow through him at times, even if he's not really.
You can like entertain the idea.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. You have that ability with him. And I do something that's small that I do feel like is also mentioned is him being in a dunker spot. It just seemed like he just knows how to place himself there perfectly.
Yeah.
Does it help having Tristan Newton and Stephon Castle being able to get downhill the way they are? Of course it does. But he was just always there. It was never like they had to worry about where is this guy. He was always there. So if they got caught up in the air, they easily dumped it off to him or wrap around the defender and passed it to him. While his offense is very, very limited, very, very limited, I don't even know if I can say that enough. And that's not a knock on him, especially with college basketball. You have to look at their system. Their system worked. Why change it? They're back-to-back champions. It wasn't like they were trying to do anything to throw him off his balance. But with him being so offensively limited, he does, I think, do really well in what they asked him to do. I think that he just showed up. It's like showed up with his lunch pail and just did what he was asked to do. I don't think he tried to do anything different, and he excelled in that. And it sounded like he got better and better at that over the season, because you could almost say last year or the year before when they won the first championship, his offense really wasn't quite existent at all. It was just if the rim wasn't open, he wasn't really doing anything. He was more of a very, very defensive minded center. So it was good to see that if you want to project going forward, that maybe with some tweaking he can eventually work on his offensive game and become more versatile, because he showed within a year he was able to grow. But as far as just expecting that, I don't know. You saw it, but I can't sit here and say, oh, well, I expect him to be this guy who's going to be way better offensively than, let's say, Mark Williams. And I think that's the biggest thing. If we're talking about another team, then I think I would have a lot more positive things to say. This is not a knock on Clingan at all. It's just if we're trying to say who should the Hornets and Hornets fans be interested in, I don't think it's Clingan. The biggest thing that you're going to see a lot of these publications say is he can stretch the floor. He can stretch the floor.
Oh my God.
And it's like, dude, he never, if Dan Hurley knew he could stretch the floor, Dan Hurley would have had him taking threes at the top of the key. Like that's what I like about UConn's coach so much. If a player can do something, they will do it. So if he was able to consistently hit threes, he would have been doing it. And it's not to say he can't eventually do it, but I'm just not drafting the guy expecting him to do it, because that's the first line in every paragraph is the Hornets would be interested in Clingan because his ability to stretch the floor.
Yeah.
Like, well, Mark Williams can stretch the floor too. Like in this comparing the two, of course.
Well, just like I'm preaching to the choir here, obviously, but like enough of the videos from the combine or from a workout where some center's shooting with no one guarding them, there's no defense rotating at them, there's no closeout, there's no like them having to catch like an awkward pick and pop pass. And like, I mean, Jonathan Givony does a very good job covering the draft for ESPN. Like, the guy's a legend, but like him with Edie last week being like, or 2 weeks at the combine or whatever, being
yeah.
Oh, look, he's proven, he's really showing the stroke. It's like, I mean, I'm not surprised that with no one guarding him, Zach Edey can be, a good jump shooter, or a, set shooter or whatever. But just to me, I'm always on a believe it when I see it approach with that type of stuff. And ultimately, if you draft Clingan, like at the whatever % chance that he adds he has some like Brooke Lopezian style, shooting development at some point in his career. I mean, obviously great. You got a real weapon, but like he's a good player and a good prospect, even without the hint of that. He's got a discrete set of skills that are super useful. I'll be here. And I think he makes sense for a lot of teams, maybe not Charlotte, but for a lot of teams in the drafts. But all right, let's go ahead and move on to our third guy here. We're going to go with another big time college player at a pretty big program as well. We're going to go with Dalton Knecht of Tennessee, 6'6", 210 pounds, 212 pounds, I think is what he weighed at the combine. Guard, wing. Maybe some people can squint and see him as a wing. He looks sort of more like a two to me. He did just turn 23 years old about a month ago, so he's one of the older guys in this draft class. Certainly one of the older guys that's got a potential lottery grade on him from an evaluation standpoint. In terms of his role, off-ball shooter, secondary scorer, volume 3-point sniper who can really shoot off movement. Defensively, like there's some problems. Looks like he could be a liability on that side of the floor. Where can you hide him? We can talk about his defense a little bit more. But it does feel like he's vulnerable on that side of the court. This has been pointed out plenty, but there's not a great track record with guys coming in as, 22, 23 years old, sort of like special shot makers and like having a great track record of success out of the draft in the NBA. But that's going to be that's him this season. For legit 4-level scorer at Tennessee, I like his ability to drive. He got to the rim a lot this season, like not just a pure, for a guy that shot, over 12 3-point attempts per 100 possessions. He got downhill and got to the rim a lot this season. 29 dunks, according to Bartorvik, over 200 attempts on close twos, where he shot 59% on close twos. Again, that's according to Bartorvik, and he's got the ability to finish the contact. Good body control, can slash, can get the spots with either hand. I like his footwork in the pick and roll. He's even got this little pivot swivel move that allows him to sort of like spin and get to shots or find different areas of pockets of space. But just a big time shooter with a great shot, lots of backspin, one of the best shooters in this class, and a really talented offensive player. So before we flip over to defense, Darian, what are your thoughts on him, on maybe just overall his prospect status as one of the older guys, and then also his offense?
He's tricky, man, because you watch him play, and it's like, why is this guy not, being looked at as so much higher in the draft? And I've seen his name kind of creep up a little bit, not too much. I've seen it go from like maybe 12 to like 10, maybe 9. But on film, it looks like he's one of the best players in the draft. But then you kind of got to dial it back, think about where the NBA is going, where the NBA is currently. Defense is also a big problem for him. But yeah, offensively, I think he's extremely gifted. You could tell that he's worked to refine his game. I think that's one thing, like hearing excerpts about him throughout the season, because he was a big player in this college basketball season. You hear a lot about how much of a hard worker he is, and a guy that is always in the gym, and a guy that's always looking to get better. And it shows. Game to game, you see certain shots that he takes. It's like, okay, last game he didn't take that shot, or last game, they blocked it. He's always adjusting his game according to whatever he sees fit. I think he does do a good job of getting to the rim. One thing I will say that's maybe a slight negative offensively is that for him to have the ball as much as he did, his assist numbers kind of weren't the best. And he really wasn't looking to play make, which is fine. But there was times I felt like he ignored guys who were open. Now, granted, it's not like Tennessee just had this myriad of guys who can light it up from 3-point range. So maybe it was like a lack of trust. But you do wonder, like, okay, with him having the ball so much, you would expect just a little more. Because, you think of someone like LaMelo, I guess in this case, of someone who could be an offense by himself. Connect to me was an offense by himself at Tennessee, but he just didn't kind of feel all the needs, what it took to be that sole guy. But as far as skill level, I think he can make almost any shot. I think you said something about a 4-level score, and he's exactly that. I don't think there's a shot he doesn't like. I think he's very crafty. I think he creates for himself a little bit. I think he has that ability to. I wouldn't, draft him and to say, oh, this guy's the creator for the team and he's going to solve all the issues. No, I wouldn't say that, but you do see the potential. But that's another thing that we, as you said, with older prospects, you don't really see them kind of be, I'm not going to say not much, but you don't see them kind of replicate their college success in the NBA. Not too often.
Mm-hmm.
It's very few, far in between, and even then, we're talking 6 here. You could go look back and say, oh, well, this guy, like I think of Kyle Kuzma even though they kind of have different skill sets, Kyle Kuzma wouldn't be a 6th pick. He's very good. I like him, but if you're redrafting that class, I don't think you pick him at 6. But he's still a talented player. I think he can make an impact right away. It's just a matter of where you're looking to have your impact. If we're talking Charlotte Hornets, he does feel a need offensively. It's just not strong enough to say, let's draft this guy at 6 to me. I think he does some things that we're missing, but I don't feel like it's something that is worth the 6th pick, especially when you know that it could plateau. And that's just before we get into defense.
Yeah. And obviously with a guy like, Kuzma, for instance, like at 6'9", whatever he is, like there's just a positional scarcity thing too, right? Like guys that move like that and can be average volume 3-point shooters, like those guys tend to play in the NBA for a long time and make a bunch of money. Like Knecht is obviously going to have to shoot it, right? If he doesn't shoot it, he's not going to last long in the NBA. Fortunately for him,
He's gonna
he is a hell of a shooter, and his combination of size, footwork, while shooting off of pin downs, it's notable. He always gets his shoulders square. The release point is high, super soft touch, and like I'm talking about, he gets his feet square on every different imaginable way. Like I even tweeted something out about this the other day. Like he came off a little like middle pin down, caught it kind of around the nail against Kentucky. He catches the ball. He's perpendicular to the rim. And he catches and then in one motion jumps midair, squares his shoulders, and then shoots it with, lofts it with touch right over Aaron, 7-1 Aaron Bradshaw. Like that's the kind of stuff he'll have to do, in the NBA. Like that, those kinds of shots, into tight windows over a great size like that, with teams, in that case, Kentucky's, switching sort of like mid screen so they can try to cover up the shot. If he can shoot that well, then he can force teams to switch, force teams to put two on the ball. And like, I'm not like a huge fan of like the playmaking for him. Like he can do it a little bit. The passing's erratic, but if he's forcing teams to put two on the ball or to switch, well, then you can get some slips off that. You can get some seals, and all of a sudden, like then the passing reads become like pretty obvious. And I do think when he does, curl, pass, gives the ball up, his ability to then relocate after that is really good. Like he's a big time relocation shooter. He explodes off the floor to get shots off. Tennessee ran a ton of floppy, Del Curry floppy action, for this guy, like 1993 floppy action. And, it was hard to stop. Like he was an offense to himself with them just giving him these little, like, single double looks off the baseline and like let Knecht pick a side and curl. And he's so like, he did a nice job reading coverages. He has the ability to fade for threes, curl into the mid range. He can come flying off, flat and try to get a catch and shoot three. He can curl and try to get downhill and use that to get to his drive game a little bit. He can also, catch. If the defense has him bottle up, he can kind of then, get to his, his handle and try to get to his pull-up game. But he's got range and touch and good footwork to every spot on the court. And he's pretty advanced, I think, in his ability to read coverages too. So there's a lot to like. If he sees drop coverage, he's going to curl for a jumper, or he can look to try to attack and chew up the space. So just like, there's a lot of stuff that you can squeeze with him as a guy that doesn't need the ball, but you can still like involve in the action, or you can use him as a spacer. And then if he really does end up shooting it, then you can also turn him loose as a screener, right? And then all of a sudden he's setting a flare screen, then he's popping, or he's setting a ghost screen and slipping out, or, blurring out or whatever. But like, he's going to need to be able to shoot it. The 6th pick for Knecht is a little too rich for me. But I do like him quite a bit as a prospect. And there's like a lot, like he's a very fun player to watch offensively because the skill level and shot making is like, pretty damn impressive. I also, last thing I would maybe add, we touched on the defense a little bit, struggles to navigate screens. He gets lost at times. He can, despite having decent size for a guard, guys can overpower him on the bump and on drives. One thing I would mention with his defense, he does rebound defensively. He can use that stuff to launch grab and go opportunities. So it's maybe at least 1+ for him on that side of the floor. So any other thoughts on Knecht, or can we go ahead and head over to Europe and turn it over for our 4th and final prospect today?
With Knecht, I just want to say that I would like to mention his combine measurables were very similar to Klay Thompson. Now, of course, athleticism plays a role in that, but it's one of those things where you look at and say, okay, can he play? Like, is there a route where he can play defense and maybe he's a little more locked in if he's a little more maybe well coached? I know there was like this big thing about the biggest reason he went to Tennessee was to be a better defender, even though it didn't kind of really turn out that way. But I will say he does have a pretty decent – he doesn't give up on a play. I feel like players do get by him a lot, but he has a really good job. He does a really good job of recovering and meeting them at the rim. The issue is that's more so with smaller players, for at least the film I saw. It's not like he was doing it with guys that, who are quick and large, who could kind of push him off at the rim. So, his defense, you maybe want to hope for it, but still 6 too rich. 6 is too rich because I don't think this defense will turn around. I mean, like you said, 23. Really, just his offensive game is so good. I don't think why you take time out to really try to change and be some defender. But yeah, that's kind of really it. We, if you want, we can move on to Risacher.
Yeah, let's do it.
So this guy, for the longest time, I didn't see it. I didn't see him as a top pick. I saw more of like 13, 14. And even then, I can admit that maybe that was a little too low. Even now, I see 6 to 10. Some people are having him at the top. I don't see it. When you watch his film, he doesn't really pop off the screen to me, Zaccharie Risacher. He's just very fundamental. He does a lot of things very well. He's a very smooth player, 6'9", 204. So he has the size that kind of you maybe would look for with Cody Williams, who we talked about in recently. So it's like if you compare the two, Risacher, you would think that he's like the more developed Cody Williams. And if you like Cody Williams' game, then look no further than Zaccharie here. But my thing with him, like I said, he doesn't really pop off the screen when you're watching him, but really good 3-point shooter. I will say that is all of recent. Really up until he had this crazy stretch at the beginning of the season where he was shooting like 50-something% from three, 56% from three. He was shooting 33%, like his whole career. Now he's a young player, but it's night and day, the shooting. So it leaves you in this position of, can you really buy it, or is it more so on the lower end? The good thing about it is 33% is not something that can't be fixed. If he can go from 33% to shooting 56% over the course of 30 games, then I feel like you're more inclined to believe in his shot. What I like about him is his ability to catch and shoot. He's really good at it, and almost to a fault. He doesn't really relocate that often. He really just stands there until they give him the ball, and usually he's wide open because the play is he's already away from the play, but he knocks down the shot. But the reason I say it's to a fault because the relocation, you wonder, like with better closeouts in the NBA with quicker guys, will he struggle? Will he still try to shoot the shot, or will he try to put the ball on the floor? Where him putting the ball on the floor is not my most loved skill by him. And it's not that it's bad. It's just that it definitely could use some work. A lot of it's strength, which I think you're going to hear us say that about a lot of guys in this class. It just feels like a lot of these guys need to go to the weight room. But I will say he has a really wide catch radius. The ball doesn't always have to be in his pocket for him to shoot. He has a really fluid motion from when he catches the ball to when he releases it. And I think that, him being wide open is part of it, but I think that that's something that can translate to the NBA. It's just going to be a matter of, does he have the confidence to kind of try to get his shot off with, like I said, quicker, taller, faster defenders. But is there anything else you want to mention about his offense? Because I know like the shooting's the big thing. Do you really believe in his shot, or do you feel as though it's more of like I still need to see a little more?
So right now we're working off a pretty good sample at this point. Like he's played, and he's not done yet, but he's played 61 games for JL Borg, including 49 starts this season, almost 23 minutes per game. It's a big jump this season. He played 50 games last year, 24 starts, 16 minutes per game when he was with Asvel. And so this has been a big jump for him. That's a lot of games, right? Yeah. 61, I mean, compared to the amount of games that, Reed Sheppard played at Kentucky this year, like in a season that started in November and ended in March. Like, with Risacher, there's obviously this pretty incredible sample. He just turned 19 last month. He's 4 years younger than Knecht. Big wing, hybrid forward type. I've seen the Harrison Barnes comp thrown around before. 6'9", 205 pounds currently. He's got a frame that's going to fill out a little bit more. He'll get stronger. And all of a sudden, you've got a real NBA player, like a guy that offers you like some size and some shooting at this positional archetype where there aren't like a lot of these guys. Like it's a very coveted player type. The number one pick is a lot though, even in this draft. And it is interesting. My overall thoughts on Risacher have changed a lot. Like if we had talked about him last May, I had seen him play only once. It was the Hoop Summit in Portland. And at the time, he was sort of trying to. It felt like in that game, he was sort of trying to play like Brandon Miller style, like big wing creator type, And I think like there's some passing in his game now with Borg this season that was maybe a little bit more like keep the possession alive, like pop it around, make the extra pass. You still see some moments of like live ball passing and creation, though. Like really, he was in a pretty serious like catch and shoot and cut, come off screen role. Thought JL Borg did some cool stuff, targeting him on lobs and back cuts and rip screens, on slob plays or baseline out of bounds, like that kind of stuff. He can have an impact. He can play above the rim. Good athlete, good size, good body control. In terms of the shot, like obviously where he was shooting through the month of December or early January, whatever, that was unsustainable. He's not the greatest 3-point shooter ever. The fact that he's settled in after 60 plus games this season at just under 39%, it's pretty good. Like if he ends up being like, sort of like in terms of percentage, like average to like a little above average on volume with that size, like he's going to play in the NBA for a long time. So I've transitioned a little bit away from him, from like thinking of him as like, oh, could this be a guy that you come in and you're going to give him X number of pick and roll possessions? Like he's not like a wing creator at this stage, but there aren't any other real wing creators in this draft,
Right.
So like, that's one of the reasons why this is a guy who he has a hint of that. He looks special on the defensive side of the floor. I would maybe stop short of some of the, Jalen McDaniels comps that I've seen.
When I saw that, I was like, "What are we watching the same thing?"
Yeah, but he like the team defense on that side of the court is interesting. There's some catch and go potential to him offensively, especially if he can get a crease and there's a straight line drive. The transition finishing looks good. The transition hit ahead passing looks good, but he's just lacking in terms of like what he can do on the basketball. So to me, taking with this guy with the number 1 pick, like would be a pretty serious risk, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially if this guy tops out as like a 3-and-D guy. And that's maybe unfair because like, the draft is imprecise and this is a tough draft cycle. But for instance, if he was available at 6 for the Hornets, that would be I think that he would be a great pick for Charlotte there.
Right.
But he's not going to, I mean, at this point, it feels like he's not going to move past the first 2 picks of the draft. So yeah, I like him a lot as a prospect. I would not take Risacher, number 1 overall.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. Like you said, because that was kind of one of the reasons why I say he doesn't pop off the screen. Because for us, I think that's a good thing. For us, for a team that has the Melo Ball, Brandon Miller, presumably Miles Bridges, I don't think we need someone that necessarily pops off the screen, but does whatever they do well. There's a lot of things we do need, but three-point shooting and defense are the biggest two, and he does both of them. I wouldn't say extremely well, but he does one extremely well and the other passable. His defense isn't lackluster by any means. He has a length. He stays in front of his guy. He's always contesting shots. To me, I think he's pretty good at contesting shots. He's always going to try to at least get a hand up in there, even if he doesn't play the best of defense.
That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. We talk about
that. We need.
We talk about that a lot on this pod, but like, I think that is sort of like one of the secret sauce things of like defending, of like trying to like deplete, opponent 3-point percentages, or having like a bunch of guys, if you had he and Miller out there flying around the wing, right, you'd have a lot of length and just good contests at that position. Like that's the one thing that makes like semi-contested, when you can make a semi-contested shot like into like a good or above average contest, like maybe not in a one-off sample, that doesn't make a huge deal, but I think over the course of a season, it ends up making like somewhat of a difference. Like I don't have the empirical evidence to like support that necessarily, but like it is something to consider.
Yeah, and I think he's excellent at like just tracking his player. He doesn't really lose his guy often. So I think he has everything that we really need. It's just a matter of if you're trying to go. Some people, some Hornets fans are trying to go for the home run, and thinking Holland or somebody, but Risacher's right there. If you feel like the Hornets are there, I keep using this example because I think it almost fits where a lot of people think we are. If you think the Hornets are there, Keegan Murray, Cam Johnson away from being a playoff team, then this would be your guy. Unfortunately, I don't think that. I think we need a lot more than a Keegan Murray or Cam Johnson, where you kind of ignore the board, get what you need to take you over to the next level. But I don't even think he's going to be there in the first place. If he is, I think you run to the podium. I think you got to run to the podium because, and we've mentioned this before, having Brandon Miller makes me a lot more acceptable to a lot of these guys because he's going to make their job a lot easier. And I think the tandem with him and Risacher specifically in this example is something that works in a lot of ways, whether that's defense, transition, offense, it doesn't matter. I think they pair hand in hand together.
Yeah, play out of the corners. He's got the corner crash down. Jail Borg will use him to set like back screens and Spain pick and roll action and pop out. He can look for shots there. He can catch and go. One of the games I watched of him this week was against Paris, a game from like a month and a half ago or so. He actually caught the ball twice in the corner and like sort of like stepped out while trying to like catch and go and load up on drives. It's not great there, but that is something he can do when there's a crease. Like he can get into some spaces. Defensively, very active lead side defender in a stance, constantly checking for cutters, monitoring the floor, long arms, really good hands, and he applies his length well. Like you mentioned him contesting threes, verticality on contests at the rim is something else that shows up. It also pops on, when he decides to crash for offensive rebounds too. So there's some like ancillary skills with Risacher that are intriguing as well. I'm looking forward to doing a little bit more film work on him. I've watched a couple of his games now. I'd like to see a few more. There's obviously a lot. There's a big sample to work off of, and I kind of need to dig into it a little bit more. I like him a lot as a prospect. One feels a tad early for me. But anything else to add on Risacher, Darian, before we wrap up here?
No, I think like you said, one's too high. Even though I feel like I don't think he's going to go one, but he definitely probably going to go top three. But if he falls to us and you want what you think is consistent, he's probably the best bet. We've talked about Holland, we talked about Buzelis, but
Castle too.
Castle. Those guys have things where you're like, oh well, if they've just fixed this, they'll be better, or I'll feel more comfortable. He, for the most part, is pretty steady, pretty even. Of course, there's things he needs to work on, but if you take him as he is, add NBA experience, NBA training to that, you have a really solid NBA player, and I don't think you have to worry about him developing something else to be that. So I feel like that's a great thing, but I just someone will even trade up before they let him fall that far.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, look, it'd be tough to be the number one pick in between Wembanyama and potentially Cooper Flagg. We'll see. But regardless, more draft coverage coming down the pipe here. Thanks to all of you who joined us for another episode of BuzzBeat, another draft episode. I'm really thrilled to get to talk hoops with Darian here. Those who listened to us ad-free and early through BuzzBeat Plus, we really appreciate you guys. Lastly, make sure to review, to rate us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever else you get your pods. We will talk to you soon. Go enjoy playoff basketball tonight.